So I kind of bandwagoned onto the 2022 New Year's resolution thing because everybody, it's a new year. Some of you might have stayed up till midnight. We were at Grandma and Grandpa's. It was really fun. And waited till the fireworks, ushered in the new year. And then everybody makes these New Year's resolutions. And usually I make a bunch of fun of people that make New Year's resolutions because what do people do? They do it for a day, maybe two, maybe a week. I heard a stat that's like after a month, like 90-something% of resolutions have already been given up. We kind of make fun of it, and I'm kind of going in this direction. But in the end, is it bad to make good choices and good changes in your life? No. Just people tend to focus like, oh, it's a new clean slate of a year. It makes it easier. So I'm kind of following that, but going to a guide of how to have a good 2022. So just a little bit of like a synopsis or just a guide into that. Now, obviously, I only have how much time. This can't be a full conclusive guide. That's why we have the Bible. So this is not exactly how you're going to be able to handle your 2022 from these 15 minutes I'll talk. No, but just a couple highlights, I would say, of just things that could really make your year better. And that's what we're always striving for, is to do our absolute best for God. That's the goal. And the best we can do in 2022, we only have 365 days. We're already down to 363 days to do that. So it's important to get it right the first time, because it sometimes is crazy when you look back, but life doesn't pause. There's no pause button. You got to go. You can't go and relive it. And so the way to have the best 2022, to do your absolute best. Now, one of them, if you want to do it, and this was something that God really was one of the highlights that he really focused on when I was studying for this, is the topic of stress and worry. And I'll turn to Philippians 4, 6, and 7 on this one. Now, this is one that's really interesting because stress and worry, they can really sap the energy out of something. Especially if you look back on a year and you spent a majority of it stressing and worrying, it really can pull that experience down. I decided to look up just some of the benefits of stress that you can get from deciding to worry and stress. Number one that almost everybody talks about is a waste of energy. It's amazing when you see something, you're like, oh man, that's really hard. And then you decide to stress about it for the next day or even hour, how much tired you are, and you haven't done anything yet. Another one is it brings great health issues, if you're into that. Stress eating, that might be a positive, I don't know. But the one that comes out the most, I didn't find this one on Google. Google's only good for so long, but it is pretty good, is that when we let stress and worry take over our life, is just straight up not a good testimony. What are other people going to think if you're always worried and stressed about the next thing? You know, there might be big things in the way. It could be small, big. I'm not even on that topic. But when we worry and stress, and someone who's not a Christian, even other Christians, but what do they think when they see you worrying and stressing about every little thing? They're going to be like, well, what do you have that I don't? Like, you say you believe in a God that created all, that can do all, and yet you're worrying about whatever. Your car breaking down, finances, all those different things. If you're following or trusting in somebody and you have a valid reason to worry, would you consider that person a good leader? Would that be a role model? If you follow them, you have a reason to worry or stress about what's going to happen, would you say that's a good leader? And I would say no. If you're following someone and you're like, you know what, if what they're doing, if they're lying or not backing up their things, you would not consider them a good leader. What are we saying when we're worried about how things are going when we're following God? We're saying, hey, I don't think you've got this. That's what other people are going to see. When they see us and we're stressed and worried about, literally, it can be anything. And it's easy. It happens like that. You can have one moment where you feel like, oh yeah, I'm on top of the world, and then boom. What are other people going to see? And then flip that, though. When you have confidence in situations where really they're hopeless, ultimately, praying for the Rolfs, most people would have no hope in that. There is none. It's just looking back over the couple years. When we have a loved one that passes away, we don't see any hope in that. But because of Christ, because of what Jesus did on the cross, because of all of that, and because we're following God and we know who He is, we can have hope in those situations. We're able not to be stressed and worried because we know, you know what, God's got this. It's amazing when the world looks in on that, they're like, that doesn't make sense. And that's what can draw them in. When people see a Christian that isn't fazed by some of the troubles because they know what? hey, I have my faith in God. He's going to take care of me. It's amazing the testimony that can be to other people. And now in Philippians 4, 6 and 7, be careful for nothing, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known unto God. And the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Now notice, it does not say, be careful for nothing, but in everything by stressing and worrying with thanksgiving, if you're thankful for that, let your requests be made known unto God. It does not say stress and worry about those things. It mentions prayer and then supplication, which is to make a request. It almost is beg, to come to Christ with our request. And then it comes in verse 7, and the peace of God, which passeth all understanding, shall keep your hearts and minds through Christ Jesus. Right there is the we're not meant to worry verse. You can have your faith in God through that. It's guaranteed that we're going to face stresses in this life. You know, some people, they like, what's this, people that, you're clearly worrying, you're stressed about something, say like, for instance, like maybe one night, I'm sure this happened several times, I have like some big test I think is coming up, something New Testament or whatever is coming up, and I'm all stressed, and Chris is just like, hey, don't worry, don't stress, you'll be fine. That's like, oh, I'm so glad you told me that not to stress, that fixes it. You know, when someone's like, hey, just do this. Oh, I didn't think of it. Like, thanks so much. That doesn't just solve the problem. You know when people, I read this. I read it. It was a hilarious article. People are like, this is how to avoid stress. Just avoid the things that are giving you stress. Like if you find an activity that tends to give you these worries and is a burden on you, just avoid them. And then I'm like, hold on. So I decided to just go along that. What are some sources of stress that is commonly found? Pressure from jobs, responsibilities, and finances. Good luck trying to dodge all those. Changes is a big one, which can really stress people out. If you think nothing's going to ever change, I'm sorry. The only thing that changes is that things change. I mean, that's just about it. And then also not having control over a situation. 2020 basically proved that. I know everybody turns to that because it's like the world shut down and all that. But really, we couldn't control what everybody else did. And we never really can. When we break it down, we really don't have the control that we think we have. Even sometimes we want to think we have this control. But God's in control, and that's important to remember. But ultimately, we don't have as much control as we even like to think. And those things can be sources of stress. It truly can be. When we realize, oh man, this change is not good, or a pressure from a job, that is a big deal. But we can't just avoid those. So we have to learn how to deal with those. What is the answer? And no, it's not someone saying don't get stressed. Turn to the next two verses after Philippians 4, 6, and 7. Go to 8 and 9. Finally, brethren, whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of a good report, if there be any virtue, if there be any praise, think on these things. Those things which we have both learned and received and heard and seen in me do, and the God of peace shall be with you. I love when God gives us lists because it gives you a lot to pick from, but also a lot more detail and information on those things. If you don't want to be stressed about everything, first of all, your faith's got to be in God. That's where the prayer and supplication come in. That's where we go when we have those burdens we need to put down instead of us carrying and worrying about it. And make it known unto God. God wants to talk to us about those things. It's amazing how even just talking to a friend about a problem, how it suddenly feels a little bit smaller because you shared it with somebody else. Do that with God, you times that by God, which is infinite. When we share those things with Him, when we let Him carry it, He has all the strength. Now, when we go to things you think on, quite often what you think on will generate a lot of stress if you're not thinking in the right perspective. And God gives us a great list of true, honest, pure, lovely, good report, virtue. Those are great things. If you're in those, you're not going to be stressing. And then it adds on. You can't just, boom, it's done. Those things which you have both learned and received and heard and seen in me, and then the action, do. You got to do it. It can't just be, trying to think, a third person. You've got to be in it. And then the God of peace shall be with you. One other thing, some practical things. that I've found, and everybody's list could be a little bit different on this, that sometimes help personally when dealing with a lot of stress or worry, just picking out a psalm or a gospel. It really puts things in perspective quick. Just read through a psalm, and suddenly you get turned back what things are true, what things are honest. That's the Bible right there. That's what you can be in, and that can be a huge help. And then it just puts everything else in perspective, where it needs to be. Something else, focusing just on God's immensity of creation. When you're having trouble thinking that God's got something, it's just great to look out and yep, look up the stars. My God created that. My Savior did all that. The crucifixion, that puts things in perspective quick. If you're, this is kind of just like the rule. If you're ever struggling, if your thoughts are in a bad place, or you're having a hard time loving somebody because it's sometimes hard when people are not good back to you, when people are being evil. It can be hard, but when you put your eyes to the cross and what Jesus did for me, all the pain that I put him through, it's amazing how that will put you back where you need to be. And so that's just a great place to be. If you're stressing and worrying, think back to what Jesus has done for us. And then also, just even a simple one too, hang out with godly friends. People that you can put on this list, and you're like, you know what? My friend, they're pure, they're just, they have a good report. Those are the type of things you're looking for in a friend. If you can find a good group to be around, that's why we have the church as fellowship. It's amazing how many times you can be like just falling through a week, and you're just like, I'm barely making it. You go through the church doors, and someone greets you, shakes your hand, asks how you're doing, and then you come in here in fellowship and receive God's word. It's amazing how quickly that builds you back up. That's why being with godly friends is such an encouragement. That's why working out in the workforce can be so hard, because wherever God calls you to work, many times you'll be called to be a witness to people, and it can be tiring, because when working with the unsaved, you don't want to become like them. You want to rub off on them. You don't want them to rub off on you. That's a tiring work. And so it's important when you have those times of fellowship, do that with each other, because not only will it be an encouragement to you, but also them. And it's just a great way to de-stress, if that's a word. And then finally, another great one is getting back to work. Sitting around is one of the hottest things. When you have to wait for something to come, the hottest thing, I had a little piano final I had to do was worth 80% of my grade. And the hottest part, there was all the work, and you put in memorizing the pieces. It's kind of scary. You got to do it all right. But the hottest part was the 10 minutes sitting in the chair waiting right before it, because there's nothing to do. You want to do something, and you just think about what could go wrong, all those things. Sometimes the best thing to do is just get back to work. Find something to do. God's got a list of things for us to do. Get in the Word somewhere. Get back to work. And then just two side notes about this. One thing I do find kind of funny, I've been guilty of this, is stressing about being stressed or worry about being worried. If that happens, it kind of is like pouring gasoline on the fire. If you're I'm planning not to stress, you get stressed, so then you're stressed about being stressed. You have to just decide, okay, it's not going good, get back on track. Don't focus on being stressed, because then you will become stressed. But then another one, which I think is a really good one, and you see even in the Bible, people struggling with this one, is what about the problems that come into our lives without the solutions? And often we're like, there is no door to walk through. There is nothing next to me to do. There is no solution to this problem. And it's really easy to become worried about those things or stressed. But something interesting, we learned this all the way back in school. Whenever you're getting taught something, you get taught in math the problem first and then the solution. The problem always has to come first, because without the problem, you didn't need a solution. When you have a quiz, they don't give you a list of the answers. They give you a list of problems. Then you have solutions. Every time, the problem's always going to come first. And many times the solution isn't ready. For instance, when you're first being taught the problem, the teacher's not just going to give you the solution. It's not there yet. There's no answer. In the Bible, we see many examples of this. Some of the big, we would call giants. Goliath, when he was first in front of the Israelites, he was a big problem, and they had no solution at the time. There was one. They just weren't looking to it. Jericho, big walls to take down a big city. Immediately, they didn't have any siege equipment. They didn't have any plan of how to get in, but the solution did come. Break it down to sin. That was the biggest problem of all humankind. When that first happened, the solution didn't happen then. It was Jesus coming back years, thousands of years later. So in those times, it can be hard when we have a problem without a solution. But just know that God will always bring the solution. There is one coming. It's just not yet. And waiting is one of the hardest things. But you have to just be focused and have your faith in God. And that's one that can be really easy, I find, to be stressed when you find a problem and you know what? There isn't a solution at the time. You have to just have faith. God's going to bring it. And now I'm going to bring in another tip to having a good 2022. I was studying this word and I found it really interesting. So the word is regret. I looked up for a definition. This was a pretty good one I found. Wishing one had made a different decision in the past because of the consequences of the decision were unfortunate. Now, immediately, some regrets that come to mind, kind of the funny ones, like on Christmas Day, ate a bunch of food, and then after that, had way too much fudge, and I immediately regretted that because that was not great. When you've eaten too much, then you eat more. And then there's some other ones. I'm thinking of a quick story. Philip's already a crazy guy. He just doesn't express it. But you put him on skis, he becomes wild. And I didn't really talk him into it. He wanted to do it, but I just encouraged it. He wanted to go down. If you understand skiing, there's like greens, which are easy, then blues, and then you have black diamonds. Those are the hardest. And I convinced him and himself to go down one. And at first, things were going pretty good. And like, I'm on a snowboard. I can stop pretty easily. But he's on skis. It's a little harder to stop. So I was like hanging about 10 to 15 feet behind him. And we were starting to go down. And we started going down a pretty steep one. So I'm kind of like, I was just kind of following him. And he's like, I was literally like from here, and there was Philip. I was not far away. And suddenly, it starts to get steep, and he's 100 feet ahead of me, just zooming down. So I'm trying to catch up. And the speed he was going at, you can't maintain unless you're like going to the Olympics. And there's this little bump of a hill, and I'm pretty sure he went airborne, but he was going really fast. And when I saw him go over that bump, I regretted taking him up that mountain at all. I'm like, I am literally going to be the reason Philip is paralyzed. I'm going to be the man. And sure enough, he wipes out. It was just like a of snow, just going everywhere. And he eventually stops somewhere down the mountain. People stopped because they were really concerned. Was that a missile or was that a person? And we finally got to him, and amazingly, he didn't break anything. He actually told me, he's like, after surviving that, I feel like I could do anything. It was, but I regretted that. It was something that was but I'm not talking about those types of regrets. That's just a side. What? Yes? This wasn't intentional. I just didn't know how to ski. Yeah, okay. Yeah. I probably should clarify that. Philip's not great at skiing. So you're meant to ski with your feet going sideways, but he skis with them like this or turned in, which I can't even do. Don't do that. That's how you crash. Yeah, he was not planning to go that fast, but yeah, that is a good clarifying point. But I'm not quite talking about that. The regrets that we look back in over life, it's amazing how they stick. Things that we wish, talking about choices that we made that had unfortunate results and consequences of a decision that were unfavorable. And that's just to put it mildly. When you go through a year and you have a bunch of regrets, the hardest thing about it is you can't change them. It's done. And if you want to be like, man, this was a great year, you don't want to do things that you're going to regret. It's interesting. I was trying to think of an antonym, the opposite of regret, and just trying to think of that word, the opposite of it. Nothing really comes to mind. I asked a couple people, and it's because I think it's a lot easier to remember something that we wish we hadn't done than something we're glad we did, because it hangs in your brain. The one exception I would say to that rule is salvation. It's amazing how people always look back to that and I'm so glad I did that. And there's a reason. It's the best thing you can do. Second best, lead someone else to the Lord. But interesting too, even people saved at an older age, one of the things they first mention is they have so many regrets of things they weren't able to do. And those stick. just a quick list of things that we will always regret, because if we're always going to regret it, if we do those things, that's going to really bring down. Anything done purely for self. You can basically sum that up with selfishness. Proverbs 16:8 is a great place to go for this one. And this one talks about pride, and I know that. 16:18, sorry. Pride goeth before destruction, and a haughty spirit before a fall. Why were we selfish? Pride. Pride's believing a lie about yourself. When you're doing things for yourself, you're proud. And it clearly says you're going to your destruction. And that's what selfishness will bring. If you're doing things purely for self, if you truly, when you think about something, why am I doing this? If the only reason you think about is you're benefiting yourself, you're going to regret that action down the road. You might not in the moment, but you will. The destructive L's is one you could put that are ones that are really easy to do for self. Lying so many times to make ourselves look better. We'll tell a little lie. If we want to cover something about ourselves, we'll lie. And then laziness. Those are two ones that you'll always regret. Laziness, that's always going to be motivated by your selfishness. And those are two huge regrets. If you look over a lot of people, what they regret most, it usually falls in those two categories. And then things done purely for the world is another thing we will always regret. And we'll turn to 1 John 2:15 and 16 on this one. So 1 John 2:15 and 16. I really like these verses. The first one I like to include. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. I have to kind of gloss over that verse, but I really suggest studying that verse out, because that entails a lot. So 1 John 2:15, I really would suggest studying that out. I have to gloss over it a little bit right now. But then it goes into, for all that is in the world, the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and the pride of life is not of the Father, but is of the world. When we look at the lust of the eyes, that's feeding your mind whatever you want. When you look at the lust of the flesh, that's doing whatever your flesh wants. Look at the pride of life, that's doing whatever you want, ignoring reason and consequence. Those are selfish. When you do those things that fall into that category, lust of the eyes, lust of the flesh, pride of life, you will regret those actions. Now, one of the most unfortunate things about sin is that it's pleasurable in the season. There's a reason that people are tempted by it. Satan's the great deceiver. There's a reason that it looks good, but you have to look at your actions and being like, what is the reason for this? What is my motivation? If it falls into you're doing it for yourself or you're doing it for the world, that's not something you want to do, and you will regret it. If not on earth, which most likely you will regret it later after you've passed. And the third thing I would definitely say you'll regret, doing nothing at all. Now, this one, I heard a really good quote, do what others won't today so you can do what others can't tomorrow. One of the worst feelings is getting done with a day that you just threw away because, you know what, I was lazy today, didn't feel like it. It's like the worst, like you almost feel sick because like you watched TV all day. Even some days when you take a bit of a rest day, it's natural. God made us to work. You notice when the curse of sin happened, work was not a punishment. They just made work unpleasurable. We were made to work. And when we don't, you're going to regret that down the road. Something I've heard so many times, people are like, I wish I did this. I wish I did this. And it's just because they chose to put that thing off until it was too late. And there is a time limit. There is a real finish line when that's it. And we don't know when that time's going to be. And then moving over, if you want to do things, so dodge the things you will always regret. So that's things you do for yourself, for the world, and then doing nothing at all. And I want to put a little disclaimer on that. It is okay to rest. This is a rare problem, but it's kind of cool because I know a lot of people in this church that have these problems. They work too hard. Jesus, when he ministered on earth, when he was human, 100% God, he did sleep. It is recorded. He did sleep. You've got to rest at times, and it's a hard balance to keep. So it's important to always stay busy for God, but also make sure to have those times of rest. There's a reason God rests on the seventh day. He set an example. Make sure to keep that in balance. That's just a side note. I don't want you to be like, Kyle told me never to rest. Kyle said never to do that. Don't sleep. Not all those things. No, don't do that. But things that you will never regret. These are great ones to do because 100%, it's great. First one, turn to 1 John 5:14 and 15. And this one's prayer. you're never going to spend 10 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, a day in prayer and be like, man, I wasted my time. I could have been doing something way better. You're never going to come away like that. I love these verses on prayer. Verse 14 in chapter 5 of 1 John. And this is the confidence that we have in him, that if we ask anything according to his will, he heareth us. And if we know that he hear us, whatsoever we ask, we know that we have the petitions that we desired of him. Now, two things I really like it includes in this is that we ask according to his will. We can't just ask for a Ferrari and we get a Ferrari. We've heard that illustration before. I missed to be sad. But the other thing I like includes he hears us. The God of everything, the God of all creation hears us. And I just love when you really think about that, and it's just literally overwhelming, and we can't wrap our minds around it. Out of all the billions of people that have ever lived over all time, God cares about all of them, but also has listened to all of them. When he hears I'm just a speck of one grain of the sand of the sea out of all the people that have existed, and God listens every time I talk. And you will never waste your time, and you will never regret being in prayer. I've never met a prayer warrior, and I never will, that was like on their deathbed and be like, I just wish I hadn't prayed as much. No, it's always the other way around. You'll never have that. Another one, it basically goes hand in hand, is you're study the Bible. You're never going to waste your time in it. I love the song. It's VBS, The Bible is a Gold Mine. That one sticks in your head, some of the VBS songs over the years. It's amazing how they make those stick. But it is really a gold mine. You can't waste your time digging in it. I mean, get in it. You will not regret spending time there. And then finally, I have to kind of rush a little bit. Matthew 22, 35, and 40. I might not read all those verses. I like it when you keep things a little simple, and because that way you can go back to it and be like, okay, things are getting too complicated. Things are expanding. There's too much to look at. I just need to break it down to one simple thing. And I'm not going to go through all the story for the sake of time, but the verse 37, Jesus said unto him, Thou shalt love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, with all thy soul, and with all thy mind. If you go into this next year with that philosophy, thou shalt love the Lord God, all thy heart, soul, and mind, it's going to be a great year. If you go into every decision every day with that as your first in mind and last thing on mind, and all between, it's going to work. You'll never regret having that outlook. And then just a couple things that I won't be able to get too deep into, but other things to really focus on. But they kind of all go back to this verse, and everything will. Keeping a good perspective is a great way to keep focused throughout a year. It's a difficult balance, but I would say the 3 L's are kind of what's best to focus on. So learn from the past, don't get stuck in it. Live in the moment, so don't miss the blessings God gives you right now and what he's given you to do that moment. But also look forward to the future, because honestly, every Christian is always looking forward to the best to come, and that can be on earth and heaven, because that's ultimately, we always can look forward, no matter what part of life you're in. Because the second you're like, the best is gone, and there are some parts, like in a meal, when you've eaten dessert too fast, the best is gone already. But as the Christian in life, we never have to be like, oh, the best is gone. Keep perspective. Always don't focus in the past and just get stuck there. You have to enjoy the moment as it comes, but also look forward a little bit. There is the best yet to come. When things are, man, this is not great, God's best is still yet to come. And it's a great outlook to have. And then a couple others. You're never going to regret loving if you're not. Even if it's hard, you're not going to regret those things. And that's a great outlook. Being soul-aware, that crosses over with not regretting your moments, because if you aren't soul-aware, you will regret missing those opportunities. That goes into love and perspective as well. Be aware, all the people around you have a soul, and that soul goes to heaven or hell. Every single person. There's no exception. Another thing, be flexible. Things change. That's a guarantee. Be content. Pastor hit that really hard this morning. That's stuff that will help you have a good 2022. One last thing, two last things I'll focus on real quick. Don't focus on the falls too hard, because when you see okay, there's a bunch of young kids, it's fun to watch them running around the church. When one falls, That happens quite often. Many times it's not actually their fault. Quite often, like especially as a young kid is still learning to walk, the parents are super excited, and when they fall, they're not like, I can't believe you've fallen. There's many reasons in life that are not sinful for personal sin when you fall. And it's hard, those moments, but you have to decide to just get back up again. And sometimes it's going to take a bit of work. But you can't just focus on those falls. And then also for bad reasons. There's many sin traps that will happen. And no one is perfect. And that's not an excuse to go sin. It never is. But if you do find yourself, don't be like, I've wasted this year. No, you can't get stuck there. You may be falling down, and it may be a lot of work to get back up. But don't ever be like, that's it, I give up in that moment. You have to just decide, not focus on that, to get through it. And once again, it goes back to your perspective, learning from the past. Use that as a learning point, but you can't get stuck there just because I'd have to wait till 2023 to get this right. No, you should get it right now. Don't let it be an excuse there. And then another one that I find that really helps, if you want to add it to the guide of have a good 2022, is focus on your weaknesses. Everybody has gifts and their strengths, and those are always important to develop because that's where God's leading us. But something I find really interesting, in the strongest Christians, they're always looking for their weaknesses because that's where they're working to. We're always being molded to be more like Christ. That's the goal, and trying to get out those little scratches and things we need to get out. If you feel like I can't find any weaknesses in my life, just pray to God, ask Him to reveal something, and He will. If you're listening, He will reveal those. But that's something that's super important. Kind of go into a basketball thing. I'm a little bit basketball-minded at times. Something we focus on a ton is when we find the stuff we're good at, and that's great. We do practice those. But what we first do when we play a game, then we all get a little TV, and we all get sent clips of what we need to watch. And they're not the highlights of the best things that happened during the games. They're always the points that we did the worst. They were our weaknesses. And the reason we do that is because we want to get better. Because if we didn't want to get better, we would just do what we enjoy. We watch the highlights, have the fun. No, we want to get better. So we focused on the weaknesses, the things we did wrong, so next time we can get them right. And that's the same in our life. Look back in the last week or two. What was something that you were weak in that you didn't do good in? What was something that is a part of your life that is lacking? Focus on those parts so you can correct them. And that is a forever process. No one's going to be perfect till we get to heaven. So that's just another thing. And so this is a bit of the guide I've looked up. But something I would highly suggest is these are great little things to have around, a guide to 2022, but also just something to have in your Bible or wherever you can see it regularly. But put something in front of you that you'll see, a guide to having a Christ-driven day. Because honestly, me having a fun 2022 is not correct. That's not the point. It's having a 2022 that's for Christ. Put up a list in front of you and add to it. Study the Bible out and find the things that's going to make you have a Christ-driven day. That's going to keep you there. Pastor.